I've tried hundreds of humbucker-equipped guitars in every price range, from under $250 to $25,000 and everything in between. None of them sound or feel like a Les Paul. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it tells us there's something unique about the Les Paul design that contributes to this tone that many of us love. In this episode of the Les Paul Experiment, we're going to discuss every single detail about the original Gibson Les Paul, but no one can afford one of those, so this is a brand new 50 standard Gibson Les Paul Gold Top. For Les Paul style guitars, this is pretty much as classic as you can get without going for a vintage guitar. Solid body, no weight relief, huge chunky neck, low output humbuckers. These are the attributes of the classic Gibson Les Paul. We even got the thumb bleeders. But before we get into these details, I want to briefly tell you about myself and why this is going to be a totally different Gibson Les Paul review / discussion. This will also help to explain some of what made me a Gibson hater growing up. Technically speaking, I'm Dr. Andre Flood. My PhD was in ethnomusicology, which is a field that mixes music and anthropology to learn more about how and why we make the music we do. It's a huge field with an insane range of topics, but there's one concept in particular that is crucial for understanding our deep dive into Les Pauls. It can also help you understand other guitar reviews and gear in general. It's called reflexivity, a circular relationship between cause and effect, especially as embedded in human belief structures. A reflexive approach is multidirectional because the causes and the effects affect the reflexive agent in a layered or complex relationship. Academics are long-winded and they love complicated names and definition for simple things. Simply put, reflexivity means the truth you find is impacted by your unique perspective, which impacts the truth you seek, which impacts the truth you find, and so on. It's a circular process. When you see me on YouTube, you see a guitarist, so I play guitar, so you think I'm a guitarist, which makes me want to play more guitar for you, and so you continue to think I'm a guitarist. When my mom sees me, she sees her son, so I act like her son, and she treats me like her son, so I act like her son. Again, it's a circular relationship. And this matters for how we think about guitars. Growing up, I'd go to guitar stores and see Gibson and PRS way high up on the wall display for crazy amounts of money. But then I'd see Fender, Ibanez, and Schecter a bit lower, and that seemed much more reasonable and logical solely based on my ideas of money as a 14-year-old kid. So I'd buy those guitars I could afford, I liked them, so I looked for similar guitars, which I liked, and that reflexive process continued to form my opinions. By the time I could afford a Gibson, it was already embedded in me to dismiss them altogether. So in my 20 plus years with guitar, I've had almost zero experience with Les Pauls or Gibson culture. In fact, I only remember playing one time, and that's because my string broke on stage, so my friend lent me his for a couple of songs. So I'm coming to this Les Paul experience as someone who has played Super Strats and weird-looking but extremely comfortable ergonomic guitars. However, since I really want that Les Paul tone that has eluded me, here we are. Starting from the headstock, we of course have that iconic Gibson design with the vintage tuners. I believe Gibson only uses synthetic Graphtec nuts now, and it was cut pretty good. I like my nut cut a little lower, but the guitar definitely plays really well, so no complaints there. There is something kind of cool about the vintage tuners and the headstock design, since, you know, Slash and Gary Moore and everyone else played these guitars. Now, the feel of the neck was the biggest shock for me. Since this is my first Les Paul, I wanted to go as old school as possible, and the 50 standard is super chunky. I play my guitars a lot, so I don't take off my strings to do measurements, but I'll put a capo on the 1st fret and the 12th fret to depress the strings, and that's the measurement I'll use throughout this series. As a point of comparison to the Gibson Les Paul, here's my Carvin Allen Holdsworth, which is close-ish to a standard C. And here's a beautiful Dean Gordon guitar with a thin C neck. Now on the back of the neck, we have a gloss nitrocellulose finish, medium jumbo frets. We'll talk more about that in a second. And as you can see, the binding wraps around the frets, which is a classic Gibson touch. And we also have a 12-inch radius. Remember our discussion on reflexivity? I'm quite used to medium jumbo frets because they're probably the most common frets used across other guitars. These Gibson frets don't feel like standard medium jumbos. That's not bad, And this is not a knock on Gibson, but it's kind of my frustration with the guitar world in general. This Les Paul has medium jumbo frets, and the Dean Gordon has medium jumbo frets, but they are totally different frets. When compared to my other guitars, the Gibson frets are noticeably shorter, which contributes to a desire to press harder with the left hand. One aspect of my personal style is legato playing, and when I first picked up the Gibson, legato felt a bit more challenging, but it happened pretty quickly. After about 5 minutes, I adjusted to the frets and found myself playing harder, but in a good way. It reminded me of Josh Smith discussing his insane string gauges.
They're 13 to 58.
Oh, are you in
standard pitch?
In standard. Oh, God, that is a lot of work.
That's part of the reason I like it, actually, is it makes you kind of like not phone it in on a gig.
To be honest, one of my technical weaknesses is I often phone it in, just like Josh Smith said. I like the sound of a light touch, but sometimes my touch is so light it sounds bad, like I'm only half playing the notes. But when playing on these frets, I'm forced to give it my all, and that has made me sound a lot better. I think it's also strengthening my left-hand legato technique. I've always liked chunky necks, and this one is super chunky. From what I can remember, it's up there with the Richie Cotsentelli and the Miles Kennedy PRS, but I'm pretty sure the Miles Kennedy PRS had the chunkiest of all, at least that I've tried. Needless to say, if you're a lover of thin neck guitars, you should probably rethink this version of the Les Paul. I noticed something else about this guitar neck, and I'm calling it my theory of left-hand gravitational pull. Academics are long-winded and they love complicated names and definition for simple things. I don't know the exact reason yet, remember this is a theory, but every guitar has a spot on the neck that feels the most normal. And then as you move towards the lower or higher frets, you tend to get a bit more uncomfortable. As a quick example, I'm most comfortable playing this carving guitar, but as I move towards fret 3, I feel like I'm stretching a little bit to get there, and as I move above fret 12 or so, I feel like my left arm is getting crunched in order for me to reach those frets. In other words, around frets 4 to 12 or so, that region has the most gravitational pull, so I tend to want to play there the most. Now, this whole idea of stretching to reach the first fret or getting cramped up reaching above the 12th fret, this is not a bad thing or a big deal. It's just part of playing the guitar. After all, we don't play violin. We have a giant neck that we have to navigate. And that's one of the reasons I actually like playing Strandberg guitars. Something about the compact nature of the body and just the neck overall, and makes it so that playing from fret 1 to even around fret 15 just feels very comfortable. And that makes a lot of sense since the Strandberg is essentially a guitar designed around the idea of comfort and ergonomics. But here's the crazy thing. The Les Paul is considered by many to be the least ergonomic guitar ever. Maybe tied with an old school Telly, but I think the Les Paul takes the cake. Anyway, once I contort my body into a comfortable playing position, more on that later, I find that I can navigate from fret 1 to fret 14 super comfortably. Now, because this is a classic Les Paul, playing above fret 15 feels very uncomfortable, but I don't like playing up there anyway. And having a Les Paul kind of gives me an excuse not to. So long story short, something about the scale length plus the bridge location plus the body, I don't really know exactly what it is, but the Les Paul neck and dimensions suit my left hand surprisingly well. And here are more things I was shocked about. The gloss neck does get sticky on occasion, but honestly, I expected a lot worse. And here's a brief spoiler for a later episode. My Heritage guitar back here, the neck gets much stickier, much faster. And now we're on to even more things I expected to be worse. QC on this guitar is actually really good. As I look around the neck and the body, the binding, I can't really find any big issues. And before you say it's because Gibson sent me their best guitar, well, I bought this guitar with my own money. In fact, Heritage Guitars sent me a guitar to review, and they sent it so fast I didn't have my Gibson yet. And since I wanted to start this experiment on the Gibson Les Paul, I was racing to find a store that offered the fastest shipping, and in this case it was Zounds. I ordered this guitar at 12:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, and it was delivered to me at 1:31 p.m. on a Wednesday. 25 hours and 16 minutes. That's insanely fast shipping. Another honest reason I went with Zounds is because this series is going to be long, and I honestly don't know if I'm keeping this Les Paul guitar. Zounds has a 45-day, no questions asked return policy. In fact, I was so impressed, I reached out to them to see if they would be interested in sponsoring part of the series, and they were. But I promise this all happened after I bought the guitar with my own money, no discounts, no communication with Zounds, nothing like that. But anyway, the next time you shop for gear, check to see who has the fastest shipping and the longest return window. And if you go with Zounds, be sure to use my link below to help support the channel with no additional cost to you. And link below, I also have a list of my favorite gear you can find at Zounds right now. So we spent a lot of time discussing the neck, but if Gibson lore is correct, one of the secrets to the Les Paul tone is the bodywood, pickups, and the placement of the pickups because of the reduced 24.75-inch scale length. This is a mahogany body with a maple top, and there's no weight relief. But the guitar actually isn't that heavy. Also, these are Gibson Birchbarker pickups with orange drop capacitors. There are certain tones I love, but I've never actually been able to achieve fully. I would always get close enough, but never quite there. That is until now. The neck pickup gives me that super dark, round, jazzy tone that I associate with guitarists like Pat Martino. The bridge with drive has a ton of snarl and attitude, that classic blues rock thing. And then the neck with drive gives me that super smooth legato sound. It's so dark and smooth. I also love having 2 volume and 2 tone knobs because I can just set my bridge pickup tone, I can set my neck pickup tone, and I can just quickly go between the two without fiddling around. There's of course also the 2 pickups combined, which gives you a little bit of quack. That's not my go-to thing, but it's there if I need it. By the way, this is also the first guitar I played in a very long time that has the pickup switcher up here, and I find myself playing and like violently smacking it. Does that happen to you? Is that a normal Les Paul thing? I'm actually getting kind of worried that I'm going to break this off. I don't know if that usually happens. Let me know in the comments below if you have experience there. And here's another tone thing that I noticed and didn't expect. Like many of you, I like to explore a lot of genres of music. I showed you some legato fusion-y stuff, some blues rock, a bit of jazz, but I also love fingerstyle playing, especially with electric guitars. Usually I bathe my fingerstyle tone with ample amounts of reverb since electrics don't have natural reverbs like acoustics do. But this Les Paul is so resonant, it has so much body and so much chime to it, I actually have to turn my reverb all the way off when doing fingerstyle playing. I'm going to turn all the reverb off. By the way, if you recognize that song, Vincent by Don McLean, and you're also a guitar player who likes to explore a lot of genres of music, maybe you also like the philosophical aspect of learning guitar, check out my free newsletter, link below, and I have lots of discussions on topics like that. So from the QC being great to the tones being great, it's almost like the Les Paul should have been my first guitar over 20 years ago. But then there are the drawbacks for me, and that's the overall lack of ergonomics. But before we discuss that, I have to remind you of reflexivity. If my life centered around gigging, and I grew up in a time where it was Fender or Gibson, I probably would have chosen a Gibson Les Paul, and I probably would have had a lot less concerns. As long as the guitar was under 10 pounds or so, maybe with a nice added belly cut, that would honestly be enough because the tone and the neck comfort fit me a lot more than any Fender with single coils. And remember, I grew up with Strats. However, my primary gig is teaching guitar online. I have an awesome program where you actually get one-on-one attention instead of just prepackaged lessons, and it's designed specifically for busy adult guitarists who are trying to learn things like playing through changes, understanding modes, making your pentatonic scales more interesting, and really anything you need to break through to that next level of guitar playing we're all after. In fact, I'm so confident in my guitar program that there's even a no questions asked money back guarantee. So I'll link that below if you're interested. And since that's my primary gig, I spend a lot of time sitting in front of a camera playing guitar. I always recommend that you periodically switch between sitting and standing, especially if you're playing for longer than 1 hour or so. But with the Les Paul, moving between my comfortable seated position, something like this, to moving to a comfortable standing position is very difficult. And again, it's difficult because I'm used to things like Strandbergs where even without thinking, I can go from sitting to standing without changing posture whatsoever. Also, let's be honest, sometimes you need to sit down and lock in for an hour or two when you're really working through a concept. And to sit with the Les Paul comfortably, I have to kind of contort my body into a position I don't feel comfortable in for very long. And before you recommend that I try an SG, I tried that already. I didn't like it. In terms of price, this guitar was $2,800. However, you can get the standard faded for $2,400, and it's basically the same guitar. You can check Troglody's channel if you want every detail about the differences. That's not really what I do. Still, $2,800, that is a lot of money for most people. So in future episodes of the Les Paul Experiment, we'll see if we can get the Les Paul tone and neck comfort while saving a little money and maybe even improving the ergonomics. But I gotta be honest, all of the Les Pauls that are coming in this series have a lot to live up to in terms of tone and left-hand comfort. Maybe I can take a Les Paul, cut off the headstock, and cut around the pickup area like this, and then just take that and bolt it onto a Strandberg body.